auditor, Romae cecidit,
Interficiamus!
Senatus hodz vult.
Blood, chaos, greed. For 100 years, the Roman Republic had been tearing itself apart. It was a machine that had conquered the world, only to turn on its own gears. Generals became warlords, senators became assassins, and the streets of Rome ran red with the ambition of men who craved power but forgot purpose. Pompey the Great, Crassus the Rich, and finally, the man who crossed the Rubicon and declared himself dictator for life, Gaius Julius Caesar. And for his ambition, they killed him. The Ides of March, a conspiracy of senators led by men he called friends, stabbed him to death on the floor of the Senate House, hoping to restore the Republic. Instead, they plunged a dagger into its heart and unleashed the final agonizing death throes. Rome was leaderless, broken, and braced for a new civil war that would undoubtedly be its last. The vultures were circling, men like Mark Antony, Caesar's charismatic but volatile right-hand man, and Brutus, the noble-minded murderer, were ready to carve up the corpse of the world. And then he arrived. He wasn't a general. He wasn't a famed politician. He was a teenager, an 18-year-old boy studying in Greece, who was known for being sickly, frail, and often overlooked. When he heard the news, he didn't have an army, he didn't have a treasury, and he had no political office. He had just one thing, a name. He was Gaius Octavius, the grandnephew of Julius Caesar, and in his will, the murdered dictator had done the unthinkable. He had adopted this unknown boy as his son, and made him his heir. To be named Caesar's heir in 44 BC was not a gift, it was a death sentence. It was a target painted on your back, visible to every soldier, senator, and rival in the fractured world. When the young Octavius returned to Italy, he was advised by his own family to refuse the inheritance, to live quietly, and to pray. He was forgotten. The statesman Cicero, one of Rome's greatest orators, dismissed him as the boy. Mark Antony, who had seized Caesar's papers and treasury, treated him with contempt, refusing to hand over his inheritance. Everyone, in every corner of Rome, underestimated him, and that was the first and last mistake they would ever make. This boy, this sickly teenager, possessed something more potent than a strong arm or a loud voice. A chilling reptilian political genius, a patience that could outlast stone, and a cold, terrifying ruthlessness that would make the warlords who came before him look like amateurs. The boy they dismissed would shed his skin, forging himself into a weapon. He would avenge his father, destroy his enemies, and in the process, he would systematically, brilliantly, and permanently kill the Roman Republic he claimed to be saving. He would end a century of civil war, usher in 200 years of peace, and build a new world on the ashes of the old. This is the story of how Gaius Octavius, the boy, died so that Augustus, the first emperor, could be born. This is the story of the creation of the Roman Empire. The first thing Octavius did was something no one expected. He took the name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. He was Caesar now, and he used that name like a key. He went to Caesar's veteran legions, the toughest soldiers in the world, and reminded them of their loyalty to his murdered father. Using his own funds, he raised a private army. Suddenly, the boy was a player. He was so effective that the Senate, desperate for a weapon to use against Mark Antony, allied with him. They thought they could control him. Cicero famously said Octavian was a boy to be praised, to be distinguished, and to be destroyed. But Octavian was the one holding the strings. After defeating Antony in a series of battles, he didn't destroy him. He did something far more cynical. He marched on Rome, forced the Senate to declare him consul, the highest office in the Republic, at the age of just 19, and then he made a deal with his enemy.
The east is yours, Antonius. The west is mine. We must agree on the legions now, or this alliance is forfeit.
It was called the Second Triumvirate, a three-man dictatorship: Octavian, Mark Antony, and a lesser general, Lepidus. This wasn't an alliance, it was a mafia pact sealed in blood. Their first act, the Proscriptions. This was not war, it was systematic murder. They published lists of their political and personal enemies. Anyone on the list could be killed for a reward, their property seized by the Triumvirate. It was a reign of terror that wiped out a generation of the Roman aristocracy. Octavian, the sickly boy, proved to be the most ruthless of all. He allegedly watched the executions and even sent the head of his guardian's killer to his mother. He was purging the Republic of its old guard and financing his new war. The target of that war? Brutus and Cassius, the assassins of Julius Caesar, who had fled to the east with an army.
Hold the line! Push forward! For Rome! Attack!
At the Battle of Philippi, the Triumvirate's legions, led by Antony's military skill, crushed the last of the liberators. Brutus and Cassius committed suicide. Caesar was avenged. But the war for Rome was not over. It had just entered its final, brutal stage. The two men who truly mattered were now the only two left standing, Octavian and Antony. They divided the world between them. Lepidus was shunted off to Africa, a forgotten relic. Octavian took the difficult, chaotic west, Italy, Gaul, Spain. Antony took the east, Greece, Turkey, Syria, and most fatefully, Egypt. It was a decision that would seal his doom, because in Egypt, Antony had a political and personal alliance with the last and most dangerous queen of the Nile, Cleopatra VII. This was the final showdown. The cold, calculating pragmatist of the West versus the charismatic, bombastic warrior of the East. It was not just a rivalry between two men. It was a clash of ideologies. It was Rome versus Alexandria. It was the future of Western civilization. Antony had been with Cleopatra before, but now he made Alexandria his capital. He had children with her. He went native, as the Romans saw it. He adopted Eastern dress, Eastern customs, and seemed to forget he was a Roman consul. Octavian, back in Rome, watched this all unfold with a predator's patience. He was a master of a new kind of warfare, propaganda. While Antony was living in what was described as decadent Oriental luxury, Octavian was in Rome, portraying himself as the humble, hard-working defender of traditional Roman values. He was the son of a god. Caesar had been deified, fighting for Roman tradition. Antony, his propaganda machine declared, was a drunken slave to a foreign witch, a man who planned to move the capital of Rome to Alexandria and bequeath Roman provinces to his illegitimate Egyptian children. The donations of Alexandria was the final straw. Antony and Cleopatra held a bizarre public ceremony where they dressed as the gods Dionysus and Isis and declared their children kings and queens of Roman territories. When Octavian illegally seized Antony's will from the temple in Rome and read it to the Senate, it confirmed every fear. Antony had asked to be buried in Alexandria. He wasn't a Roman anymore.
This storm mirrors the chaos that threatens our great city. But I say to the Senate, the time for
Octavian had his casus belli. He didn't declare war on Antony. That would be another civil war, and Romans were sick of them. He performed a brilliant legal and political maneuver. He declared war on Cleopatra. This was now a foreign war, a righteous war to defend Rome from a grasping Eastern queen and her brainwashed Roman general. The world held its breath. The final confrontation came in 31 BC, a massive naval battle off the coast of Greece, the Battle of Actium.
Hold the line! Stop the breakthrough! They are running! After them!
It was one of the largest naval battles in history, but it was not a glorious fight. It was messy, chaotic, and ultimately a disaster for Antony. His heavy, slow ships were outmaneuvered by Octavian's lighter, faster vessels, commanded by his brilliant admiral, Marcus Agrippa. In the middle of the battle, with the outcome still in doubt, Cleopatra's squadron of ships suddenly broke from the line and fled. And Antony, seeing her go, abandoned his men, his fleet and his reputation and chased after her. His army, leaderless and demoralized, surrendered. Octavian had won. He pursued them to Egypt. The end was swift. Antony, hearing a false report that Cleopatra was dead, committed suicide by falling on his sword. Cleopatra, after a final, failed attempt to beguile Octavian, famously took her own life, letting an asp, a venomous snake, bite her. Octavian had Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, strangled, chillingly remarking, "It is not good to have too many Caesars." At 32 years old, Octavian stood alone. He was the sole, undisputed master of the Roman world. He had avenged his father, destroyed every rival, and united the entire Mediterranean under his command. He had the armies. He had the money. The treasury of Egypt alone made him the richest man alive. He had absolute power. And now he faced his greatest challenge, a problem that had killed his own father. What do you do with absolute power in a republic that hates kings? How do you hold on to power without ending up with 23 daggers in your back? What Octavian did next was his true masterpiece. It was a political revolution so brilliant, so subtle, that many Romans didn't even realize it was happening. He wasn't going to be a dictator like Caesar. He wasn't going to be a king. He was going to be something new.
I have restored the laws and the lands. I return the Republic to you, senators, but I will not abandon Rome in her hour of need.
In 27 BC, Octavian walked into the Senate and performed a magnificent piece of political theater. He announced that the wars were over, the Republic was at peace, and that he was now resigning. He restored all his powers, all his armies, all his provinces back to the Senate and people of Rome. He declared the Republic restored. It was a bluff and a brilliant one. The senators, many of them his own appointees, were terrified. They knew the only thing that had kept Rome from collapsing back into civil war for the last decade was him. They knew that without him, the warlords would rise again. They begged him to stay. They convinced him to accept a new package of powers to safeguard the state. And they gave him a new name, not Rex, king, not dictator. They gave him the name Augustus. It meant the revered one, or the illustrious one. It was a name with no political history, no baggage. It was semi-divine. He was no longer Octavian, the bloody warlord who had signed death warrants. He was Augustus, the savior of the state. He also took the title princeps, meaning first citizen. This was the lie, the beautiful, necessary lie. The restoration of the Republic was, in fact, its funeral. Augustus had created a new system, the Principate. On the surface, the Republic lived on, the Senate still met, elections were still held, consuls were still appointed, but it was all a shadow play. The reality was that Augustus held all the true power. He was given proconsular imperium, which gave him direct command over all the critical provinces, the ones with the armies. He was given tribunician potestas, which gave him the power to veto the Senate, propose laws, and be personally sacrosanct. It was a crime to harm or disrespect him. He ruled not as a king, but as a committee of one. He held the power of the army, the power of the treasury, and the power of the law, all while claiming to be nothing more than the Republic's most loyal servant. It was the invention of the Roman Empire, hidden inside the shell of the Roman Republic. And what did he do with this power? He ended the chaos. For the first time in a century, the gates of the Temple of Janus, which were only closed in times of absolute peace, were shut. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, had begun. Augustus launched the most ambitious building program in history. He famously boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He built temples, theaters, aqueducts, and roads. He created the city's first police force and fire department. He created the Praetorian Guard, an elite bodyguard for the emperor, the only soldiers allowed in the city. He professionalized the army, making it a standing, loyal force, with soldiers swearing an oath not to the Senate, but to him. He was not just a builder of stone, he was an engineer of souls. He tried to reform Roman morality. He passed the Julian laws, which encouraged marriage, rewarded families for having children, and severely punished adultery. This was, perhaps, his greatest hypocrisy. While he was trying to legislate morality, his own family life was a disaster. He had one child, his daughter Julia, and her promiscuous behavior became such a public scandal that he was eventually forced, by his own laws, to exile her to a remote island where she died of starvation. The empire was secure, but it was not without its scars. Augustus had one final, devastating military failure. He had always wanted to expand the empire to the Elbe River in modern-day Germany. In 9 AD, 3 entire Roman legions, over 20,000 men, were led into an ambush in the Teutoburg forest by a Germanic chieftain named Arminius, who had been trained by the Romans. The legions, commanded by Publius Quinctilius Varus, were utterly annihilated. When Augustus heard the news, he was said to be driven mad with grief, banging his head against the palace walls, wailing, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." Rome would never again try to conquer Germania. The Rhine would remain the frontier of the empire for 400 years. The other great tragedy of his life was the one that plagued all autocrats: succession. He was not a king, so he couldn't just name a successor. He had to groom one, giving him powers within the republican framework. But his search for an heir was cursed. He had no sons. He first favored his nephew Marcellus. He died. He then turned to his greatest friend and general, Agrippa. He died. He then poured all his hopes into his grandsons, Gaius and Lucius, Julia's children. They both died young, one of illness, one of a wound. Augustus was old, heartbroken, and out of options. He was left with only one choice, the one man he seemed to truly dislike, his stepson, Tiberius, a grim, capable, but unloved general. But the choice was made. The system, his system, had to continue. In 14 AD, at the age of 75, Augustus lay dying. He had ruled the Roman world for 41 years, a reign of almost incomprehensible length and stability. He had outlived his friends, his enemies, his daughter, and his heirs. He had remade the world. As he lay on his deathbed, surrounded by his wife Livia, he is said to have asked, "Have I played my part well in the comedy of life? Then applaud as I exit." His final public words, recorded in the Res Gestae, his own account of his life's achievements, were simple: "The play is over." When he died, the transition of power was peaceful. The Senate, without question, confirmed Tiberius as the new princeps. The armies swore their loyalty to him, the people mourned, the system worked. That, more than the marble, more than the peace, was his ultimate victory. He had created a monarchy so stable that it could survive its creator. Gaius Octavius was a bloody revolutionary, a ruthless warlord who waded through a river of blood to seize power. But Augustus was something else entirely. He was the architect of an empire, a pragmatist who understood that a broken world needed a strong hand, even if that hand had to wear a velvet glove. He created a system that gave the West 2 centuries of its greatest prosperity, a golden age that future generations would look back on with awe. But he also created the mechanism for its downfall. The very system he designed, a single man, backed by the army, with absolute power, would eventually be wielded by madmen like Caligula and Nero. The Praetorian Guard he created would one day assassinate emperors and sell the throne to the highest bidder. He was not a good man. By our standards, or even by the standards of the old republic, he was a tyrant, a propagandist, and a murderer. But he may have been a necessary one. He found Rome in chaos and left it in order. He ended a century of slaughter and gave 200 years of peace. He was and remains the single most important and influential figure in Roman history. He was the man who, for good and for ill, truly built the Roman Empire.